Hey man, thanks for waiting. So basically, this is my dev weekly updates. It's going to cover what I've done this week, what I've done last week, and then what I'm going to do this week. So last week is all about schema. It's all about the database. So I want to make sure that whatever schema that we're going to work with, the database is able to support our ongoing development sprint, weeks to come, and basically I've identified a few issues, even though you've used cursor to help you with building the migrations and everything. However, I still find a couple of gaps, couple of errors, a couple of bugs that I noticed the cursor was still doing. And again, this is why I intervene and making sure that I can optimize your schema and basically to help support whatever that we're about to do in the next upcoming weeks. Okay, so and then once I'm done with this, I'm going to cover what's next, what I'm going to work on this week. So previous schema, what was wrong? Right, there are 6 issues. Right, so number one, most importantly, right, so in an organization, this definitely not going to be like a use case where it's only the owner owning the access, right? There might be a lot of other use case where owner will delegate the access to department leaders or HRs or finance, So very, very important that this access control delegation, is there in the schema in order to better support, different user access role, different permission levels. Now, this was missing from the cursor code, the cursor migrations, okay? So that's number one. Number two, poor scalability. It's hard to add new type of users or permissions, new types of users. We never know what kind of user types that we're going to do in the future. Maybe all the types in the form of probably, and the best analogy is like have admin as the user type, or you have editor as your second user type, or the third is employee user type. And each of these user type might have different set of permissions, right? Now, the worst part, the worst nightmare for any dev team is that we need to do the schema changes happen right after, like once we're done with a couple of features, we deploy them, and suddenly the schema changes has to happen because we have to support the new feature for different user type. So that's going to be a nightmare because we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to check whether the schema changes will cause any conflict with, to the database, and also on the coding level, on the code base level. Very, very important that we want to prevent this from happening, like, down the line. And then limited support for enterprise use case. Again, this is to go back to the number one point where previously we were just assuming, the use case is only for owners, that only one business owner, one man show, right? So which is definitely not the case, right? Since we are trying to pitch to enterprise, definitely we need to have the multiple access role. Now, the third thing is the migration issues. So the migration issues, basically, I just noticed that to build this is where I noticed that there's a lot of tables missing, despite whatever stuff that you've built and the guardrails and everything, the template that you've plugged in cursor, there's still gaps, so gaps in these tables that are missing, and the RS policies were failing to be applied. So what I did was I created these new tables in order to then apply the RS policies to the existing tables. And I also noticed that the policies were scattered across different migration files. Again, this is very typical when you're dealing with AI generated code like cursor, because the context always changes over time. It depends on the prompts that you gave. And, so one thing that might have happened, you might have defined a certain thing at the first prompt, and then down the line, suddenly you talk about it again. So, everything end up like you have policies scattered different migration files. Number 4, the no trigger support. So since our app will require that trigger, the based on the events and stuff like that. So the old schema, there's no way to define, right? So no triggers, no way to store the automation triggers. That's number 4. So number 5, no transaction tracking. Very important. If we want to apply, if we want to build our, which is a temporary thing, we're gonna eventually move on to Stripe Wallet eventually. But then since we're building this temporary database based wallet, so we have to make sure that the transaction tracking is there, because the transaction tracking is going to be our North Star. It's going to be our source of truth in order to define, the wallet table, which is another table that stores the wallet funds, available funds for each organization, so that we know whether the wallet needs to be deducted or need to be added, right? So the transaction tracking is a source of truth. No idempotency protection. Now, this is super important, and I'm surprised again Cursor didn't suggest it to this initially when we're building it. Very, very important, because when we're dealing with payments, transactions, one thing that we want, the least of thing that we want to happen is double charging or duplicate orders. That means, we've processed it somehow, but then because there's no idempotency keys to ensure that, this is safely retried, like we can safely retry this. Maybe there's some sort of payment errors, happening, maybe charge card error, and then we are not tracking this properly. Suddenly we are double charging the customer. Definitely not going to happen. Definitely very dangerous. You have to prevent this from happening. So this is where I implemented all the required optimizations, right? Number 1 is the automation capabilities. So organization can now define triggers for automation action. Now, again, you have that in the code base, but you don't have the schema and database to support whatever that you're doing. So, I'm trying to make sure that it matches the code base, okay? And then the JSON conf field allows flexible trigger configurations. And then most importantly, we want to track who created each trigger. Very important as well. We want to know if there's 10 different employees in 10 different department leaders, and they create all these different kind of triggers. We definitely want to know who are the owner for each trigger, so that we can always check back with that person and ask hey, why did you create the trigger? Is that important? What maybe we should change it or something like that. Financial operations. Again, transaction history, status tracking, and metadata for additional transaction details. API reliability, very important. The idempotency keys will prevent duplicate operations when we're dealing with, on an API level basis, especially with Stripe API. We will request hashing for verification and expiration of all keys if the operation is done, and response caching. Again, response caching is for us to understand if there is a previous transaction that was put on hold or failed, and then we want to make sure that this response persisted, so that we don't overcharge the client again. And then for budget management, I've mentioned this earlier about the role-based access control, stuff like that. Modified relationships. Now, I noticed that the previous table, the database already have an owner ID, the owner ID column. However, so I still retain that for backward compatibility. But the only thing I add here is that users can then be associated with organizations. So there is a relation between users through their user organization roles. So that means, what does it mean by that? Is that an organization can have different users with different roles within the same organization. So we're adding that layer that was missing before. And then improve iOS policies. Now the policies will now check. So previously it was just owner, right? Remember the previous schema had an issue where it was only for owner one-man show use case. So now the policies, iOS policies, will now check against user organization roles, whenever, anything needs to happen. More granular access policies are applied. after user organization roles table exists, stuff like that. And then these are the tables that I've added. Okay, the purpose is straightforward. You'll know what you're supposed to do. Transactions tables, I mentioned this earlier, in order to track financial transactions for organization, refunds and stuff like that. Again, this is the idempotency thing that I've talked about earlier, where we want to make sure that not only it has the the key, but it has the scope of what type, like what is it related about, and status. For example, the scope could be like refund, or the scope could be charge, right? And we want to know that the status is not failing, or if the status fails, we need to make sure that it persisted so that again we don't double charge the client. Roles and organizations, these are the roles based access control stuff I was talking about earlier, and then the work and the balance for, and again, this is very basic. It's going to be more as we shift towards Stripe wallet feature, but this is just enough to cover the basic MVP for the rest of the 5 weeks that we're gonna do. Okay, so what's next this week? So what I'm gonna do here is that I'm gonna create a task to inspect new schema stability. I've already did the task, but I'm going to create the task so that you can see it, so that you can see what are the steps being conducted in the task and how is the new schema stable against the older schema, right? And then I'm going to audit the onboarding flow, the organization creation. So I'm going to do some testing in the code base level, see if I can, onboard myself. I can create a new organization, and then validate link generation, in case if we, for example, here I just give an example. You have a new hire just came in the organization, so I'm just gonna generate a link, generate a trigger, generate a link, and then validate, whether is that happening correctly. And then most importantly, image upload, Superbase storage, I need to check. I need to recheck again. I know that this feature has been covered before, but I still need to check whether have we imposed some restrictions on what kind of, the sizing of the file, the format of the file. The size is very important, because we want to make sure that when we're using the Superbase storage, we're not overkilling the cost because of image upload. Because luckily we're not doing video uploads. That's a whole new story there, where we might need to consider more advanced tools, more advanced CDN for that. But these are just for the image upload, and then the issue upload the image are used in the AI workflows, review catalog access logic, and verify trigger to catalog association, fulfillable links, and then fulfillment dashboard integration. So all these are going to be the next sprint, and I hope to hope this covers everything, and I hope that the next time we meet up, either I'll prepare this video again for you to review, or I can basically we can discuss this face to face when we do the next stand up. All right, take care.